Hey, good afternoon. Can somebody just pop in the chat that they can all hear me? Yep, brilliant. Okay, thank you. We are just give you a minute more just to make sure that there's no last couple of people who are coming in. Okay, and just to let you know that this is now being, from this point forward, is being recorded and will be available on our PSHRE Network YouTube channel from this evening. Just a couple more people coming in. Okay, so welcome to this webinar for the PSHRE Network about engaging parents in PSHRE, which is something that's just been really prevalent in the news recently, and also with recent guidance being sent out from the Department for Education as well. We're going to look at it from a couple of points of view. I have with me today, I have Helen Stone, who is the assistant head at Bridgewater College Academy, who's going to talk to you from a primary point of view, and also Sharon Hooper, who is the assistant head teacher at Stanchester Academy. So essentially, Sharon is my line manager. Who's going to talk to you in terms of engaging with parents from a secondary point of view. So hopefully we're able to cover a lot of bases today. And I'm going to speak to you regarding sort of administration of things and how we might look at setting things up to engage with parents. So if we why is it important for us from a starting point of view? Why is it important that we are doing this engagement with parents over PSHRE? And I think overwhelmingly, from my point of view, I think we need to start with a positive conversation about PSHE right from the beginning, rather than waiting till a parent says, oh, actually, I'm not very happy about that, and I'm going to come in and complain, and I want to withdraw my child. I think engaging with parents right from the beginning and having that positive conversation about the need for PSHE, second only to the fact that it's now compulsory. We have these set of objectives that we have to meet, about starting that conversation, opening those conversations, breaking down those barriers, and having conversations with parents from the start, from framed in a really positive light about the benefit for their children, about the overwhelming positive impact that having good quality PSHE provision within your school will have on their child. And so starting it from that point of view, I think in a lot of ways will kind of prevent or minimize the number of questions later on down the line about, why we're doing this, and I want to remove my child from PSHE, or as we've seen a lot in the press, this really negative conversation around PSHE and this sort of media storm. So it's really important that from the point of view that we have our Department for Education guidance that's come out. It is open to interpretation, that it's quite wide, it's quite it's in certain areas it's quite non-specific. It came out obviously in 2020, implemented from April 2021, recently then we also had this additional communication from the Department for Education about what we should and should not be communicating to our parents, which in a lot of ways has given us a bit more clarity about what we should be sharing. The Department for Education, currently we're awaiting a review for the current provision. Potentially we could have changes to what we currently have to provide, and hopefully we will get greater clarity on when and how those outcomes should be met. At the very least, it would be great to have a key stage split rather than just at the end of primary, end of secondary. This is what children should have learnt. And so the guidance we had from the DfE has given us more clarity about what we should or should not be sending to parents, but it then also created this additional problem with, well, hang on a minute, we get our provision from an outside provider, for example, Scarf or Jigsaw, Bounce Forward, all of these different places. Actually, what's the copyright issues? And I will look at that in a little bit more detail going forward. It's really important that we are clear and we have this transparency with our parents about what we are teaching them, when we are teaching, but it's also a really fine line as to what we're treading, because if we give them not enough information, that kind of starts the conversation and then they want to ask more questions, or worse, as we've seen in the media, they just make up what they don't know. They just assume that it must be this, or they worst case scenario and catastrophize it. If we give them too much information, we've given them so much information that either it overwhelms them or they then start picking it to pieces to find the holes, and then that can also whip up a storm. So I'm going to share with you in a bit what we have done at Stanchester and what we are planning, because it's still in development, exactly what we're going to share with parents, and what you should have, and then what ideally you could have available for parents to have sight of should they wish to see it. I've seen lots of media storm around PSHE in the recent months. Headlines such as Key Stage 2, 6-year-olds being taught about masturbation and things like that. And we know that that's not true. That's not what's happening. But as I say, the media are very good at picking sort of little bits of pieces and what makes a good headline, what makes a good story. But conversely, we've also had headlines about assault of students as young as 8 by their peers, as well as the availability of pornography to children as young as 7. And so it's really important that we are very clear with our parents, what are we teaching and when are we teaching it, so that it almost puts their mind at rest that this media storm that surrounds PSHE teaching is exactly that. It's just a media storm. It's a way of selling newspapers and headlines and clicks on social media and things like that. That actually parents can be confident that us as a school, this is what we're teaching them, when we are teaching them, and why are we teaching them this. And then you can go into, actually, if you're not comfortable with that, here, should you wish to withdraw, this is what you can withdraw your child from. So going on to when do we communicate with our parents, and there's certain sort of points within the programme of your year where you really should be communicating with parents, so that they can have their say and they can feel like they're being included in their child's education. So first and foremost, everyone should have an RSE policy now. If you don't and you are still writing one, then you should be engaging your parents in the writing of that policy. So your policy should be reviewed at least every 2 years, if not annually. And also possibly if you change provider, if you currently use Scarf and you're going to change to Jigsaw or any other provider, and therefore you're going to have a significant change to your overview or the way you're physically going to be teaching and your resources, then possibly you should review your policy at that point as well. And it may or may not be that you want to include parents in actually what their opinion on their current provision and what do you like about it, what do you not like about it, etc. And the easiest way that we found to do that is to do something like an MS form or a Google quiz where we send out a set of questions that can be graded either yes, no, maybe, or rate it out of 5, those kinds of things, with an option at the end of that to then add any additional comments. That sort of gives them a really efficient way of gathering information that then you can manipulate. You send them out as paper copies, those paper copies can get lost, but equally that's an awful lot of data for you to sift through physically, whereas you can you can do that data sort from an MS form or a Google form. You can then transfer that to Excel and sort the data and do also sorts of data management on that to gather that information. An information evening for parents is a really, really great way for answering questions directly and for feeling that parents have had their questions answered when they've asked them. Whereas obviously if you do it via a form, there's going to be that lag period between them asking a question and getting an answer for them. It also gives you as a school the ability to get a general feel from the parents about how they feel about PSHE or RSE provision at your school. You'd be able to highlight any common misconceptions, anywhere where there's some beliefs amongst parents which aren't true. You can obviously nip those in the bud sort of right there and then. But the information that you would gather from an information evening is obviously very difficult to process. So if you're going to do an information evening, I would recommend giving them an ability to feedback through a Google form or an MS form, somewhere where you could process that information. It's really important that you are informing your parents of an overview of the teaching. Now that might be just that might be something that's provided by the company that you've got your resources from, or it might be something you write yourself, which tells your parents, in this term, we're going to be looking at this in this year group. And I will show you an example of our one at Stanchester in a moment. I've seen this done at a primary a lot. I know from my own children and from speaking to primary leads across our trust that when specific RSE content comes up at primary, that information is communicated to parents that will happen. As I say, that I've seen that more at primary level, and not so much at secondary level, but I think maybe that's something we should be thinking of at secondary level, particularly when we're talking about more challenging topics, particularly those that involve things like coercion or sexually transmitted diseases, those kinds of things, that maybe we should be informing our parents of that specific content as it's coming up. All very well having an overview on your website, but if you've then got a specific topic coming up, it might be that you want to communicate with that particular year group that we need to talk about this. If a parent wishes to withdraw students, it's really obviously necessary for you to have a conversation. They can't just withdraw them. That conversation needs to happen, and we'll have a look at how that happens going forward. And Helen and Sharon will answer more questions about what specifically we can be withdrawn from. But there was a question about what can they be withdrawn from, and the guidance seems quite loose, but actually specifically what can they be withdrawn from? You can't withdraw children from any aspect of relationship education or health education. So everything on the health education outcomes, they need to be present in their school, and they need to be present in their lessons for that. Anything in the relationship education section, they need to be present for, except for the sex education section, which to my mind, looking through the guidance, unless it's part of the science curriculum. So specifically on the intimate and sexual relationships, including sexual health, that is from my interpretation, that is the area that they can be withdrawn from, except for any conversation that goes around contraceptive choices, their efficacy, and contraceptive options, because that's in the science curriculum for B5, talking about hormonal and non-hormonal contraceptive choices, and then looking at how sexually transmitted infections are transmitted and prevented and how prevalent they are. So that area is within the science curriculum, so students cannot be removed from that. But the rest of the section for intimate and sexual relationships, including sexual health, looking at things like fertility, choosing whether you want to have sex or not, strategies for identifying and managing sexual pressure, those kinds of things. The facts around pregnancy and miscarriage, I think, is included. the use of whether alcohol and drugs can lead to risky sexual behaviour. All of those things, in theory, children can be withdrawn from at secondary up to and until 3 terms before their 16th birthday. So if they turn 16 in September of year 11, they can be included from September year 10 in their sex education lessons. I think what's really important to do is for you as a schoolie to go through and cross-reference your science curriculum with your PSHE curriculum and outcomes, but that gives you a sort of short general overview. And I apologise, I don't have a slide for that. It may well be that you want to come back to this section of the video and just rewatch it later on. What else do we need to? Anytime parents want to have more details about what they're being taught, I think there needs to be a conversation at that point. We should never brush off a parent that wants to have more information. I personally think it's a good thing that they would like to know more about what's being taught at their child's school. It may well be that we want to do some parent surveys about general education at school, and there's no reason why things to do with PSHE couldn't be included in those either. It can be used to help, so information from parents' evening we can use to plan open evenings and information events, any communications between school and home, and at this point as well also identify if there's any misconceptions about what is taught that can be easily addressed. And then it may well be that you want to extend your PSHE curriculum to help support parents in teaching PSHE or having those PSHE conversations with their children at home. It might be valuable to you to have a parental workshop or an information evening. Now, the PSHE Association, if you are a member, and I actually think that this is available even if you aren't a member of the PSHE Association, have got a really good document entitled Relationships and Sex Education, Supporting Parental Engagement. And I think you can download that from the PSHE Association website without being a member. And that has got some really great information in there about what you can withdraw from, the positive ways to engage with parents, those kinds of things, and kind of a layout also. If you wanted to choose to have like a parent workshop plan, there's even a sample layout of how you might carry that out as well. So some great information in there that might help us. What this looks like for me at Stanchester is that on our website, which is currently in preparation, you know, like most teaching staff and obviously everybody in the panel today, you know, are current teachers. We're sort of obviously busy and lots of different things going on at the moment. So in preparation on our website is a copy of our relationship and sex education and health education policy. So that is there in amongst all of our other policies. We have an overview of topics, which I will show you. Our generic, well, it's not generic, it's specific for each year group, but it doesn't go into detail about what's covered in each topic, is going to be provided for each year group. We then will be linking some PDF examples of lesson resources that will be essentially you won't be able to right click and download that photograph. So those resources cannot be downloaded, and therefore that helps us a little bit with the copyright issue, which I'll have a talk with you about in a moment. And we're also planning on having a section on our website for PSHE and health education with links to other organisations that may well provide support for them and their children, and what that support looks like, what particular areas might that organisation be able to help them with. So that's what our website is going to look like. In terms of stuff that would be sent out to parents, when we look at reviewing our policies, we will send out consultation questionnaires in the form of a MS form. And what's already been sent out to parents, we did that consultation, and with it I also sent out a video explanation of what the statutory changes were and how we would implement them. And I find personally that sometimes a short video that is 5 minutes long is parents are more likely to sit and watch that short 5-minute video and take on board what's being sent to them than a 2-page explanation or list of documentation that they need to read through. So we found here that video explanations, if you've got time to make one, actually garner more positive response from our parents than sending them reams and reams of paper information or lots of links to different places. So that's the information that's either in preparation or gone out from Scanchester to our parents. So on your website, they should obviously have access to the RSE and Healthy policy, the PSHE programme from the year. Also on your website, you should also have information on who is the curriculum lead and who to contact should they wish to discuss PSHE, so that they feel like they've got a specific person to contact rather than just emailing generically to the school. And in hard copy, it's quite important that so we can have it on the website or in hard copy, example of teaching materials, and you might have teaching materials that you've prepared solely within our school, and we've got a mixture of materials that have that we have designed ourselves, mixture of materials that we have bought in, and so having those things either in website in a PDF that can't be downloaded or in hard copy that parents can have sight of but they can't take away with them is really important. And this is our overview. So this is what our year at Stanchester looks like, split into year groups and into terms. And then to consolidate our learning, we have planned in drop-down days to make sure, not only do we make sure we cover everything, but we've also consolidated some of the learning that they've done previously before that drop-down day. So they've had a chance to then see it in real world terms, for example. And this will be on our website and available for parents to have a look at. Yeah. So the issue of copyright is a sticky one. I've had lots of things on social media posts and things like that talking about, well, what can I share? What can I not share? And it's quite interesting that the government have said that actually, in terms of copyrights, that actually they have said that is not a reason to not share what you are teaching with your children. So that actually we should be sharing our information with our parents, and there is no legal reason for you not to show a parent the resources that are provided by an external company. I think what we get into is not physically sharing those resources, so not emailing out or allowing reams and reams and reams of lesson resources on our website that parents can then download and share. That is what we're not allowed to do. So in terms of that, we need to make sure that if you use an outside provider for any of your resources, why is that not working? Often it says those outside resources, they do not copy or reproduce without permission. Okay, obviously, if we then share them, we have shared them without permission. If we print them out at school and allow a parent to have a look at those resources, should they want to have a look at them, then we have not broken that copyright. We're not reproducing them, they're not leaving the school building. So that is perfectly acceptable for us to do that. If we put them on our website with PDF copies that can't be downloaded, which we clearly credit to the company that has provided those resources and produced those resources, so they can't be downloaded, they can't be shared, and we have specifically said, please do not share these resources, and we've added that company, do not copy or reproduce. I don't believe that we are in breach of our copyrights. It's a sticky grey area. I think if you can avoid putting PDF copies of resources provided by an external provider on your website, and you can manage with just examples of your own resources that you provided. I think that that's acceptable. I think it's acceptable to put on the website the overview of learning if it's provided specifically by that company, because that overview of learning will be provided on their own website. So any examples that they provide on their own website that are easily accessible, you can, I think it's safe to reproduce those on your website as well, because they are publicly available on that company's own website as well. And then in person, hard copies that can be viewed in school but not taken, or you could view them digitally in school. The parent could view them digitally, but they're not taking them away. They're not reproducing them. They're not photocopying them, distributing them and things like that. I think that is all acceptable. I don't know if Helen and or Sharon, you have anything you wanted to add about the issue of copyright.
Yeah, Bex, I was only going to add that essentially it is much safer, in my experience, to where you think appropriate to share the own versions of your own teaching, the resources that you're using, because obviously they are something that's held by the school. There isn't a legal copyright on those. So I would also be mindful, obviously, about sharing everything. I think Bex has already said that, but it is much safer if you have your own version of something that isn't breaching the copyright, that has been adapted or is part of a wider body of work. Then that would probably be easier to share.
Great, thank you. And I think that's key, isn't it? I've never had a conversation with a parent who wanted to see absolutely everything that their child is going to be taught. They want to know key subjects, key topics, and therefore giving an example of one or two things from each year group, I think, is probably sufficient. And should a parent want to see more, then asking them to come into school to have a look through what is taught, I think is a better way of going than preempting it and putting everything on your website. Actually, in my experience this year, we had quite an in-depth day on PSHE a few weeks ago, and year 10 were doing sexual health, and year 11 were doing safety within a relationship, which obviously tackled some quite difficult topics. And we didn't have any feedback from a single parent that was negative about the day. Literally the only question we had was it sensible to do this now when year 11 have got mocks in a couple of weeks? Could we not have done it afterwards? It was a timing issue rather than a content issue, and obviously took that feedback on board. So actually, in my experience, I haven't had too many difficult conversations with parents about PSHE and the reason we teach it. But Sharon and Helen are going to speak to you, having had more conversations about this topic. So I think we're going to hand over to Helen to talk from a primary point of view.
Thanks, Bex. So hi, I'm Helen. I work at Bridgewater College Academy, and I am the personal development lead here in our school. So most of my kind of suggestions, I'm just really going to reiterate what Bex has already said. There isn't, I don't think, anything particularly different for primary, just maybe that your content is slightly different and what you're going to be sharing with the parents. So these are my 4 top tips. So my first one, as personal development leads, my first tip is about knowing your stuff, basically. So know your primary curriculum content. So you may choose to follow a scheme. You may have written your own scheme, but if you, as the personal development lead, are, say, the year 1 teacher, and you have a parent asking questions about content in year 5, you are going to need to know exactly what is covered in that lesson. So that's my first piece of advice. It sounds really obvious, but if you're in a large school like I am, you may not even see many of the year 5, year 6 students, and may not have lots of contact with them. So I would really, really recommend that you know your primary curriculum content for science and also for personal development, so that when any tricky questions come up, you know what you're talking about and you're able to say, yes, but because of this, this and this, you can talk through your decisions on why that content may be covered. Second one is also about knowing your stuff and know the RSE guidance and your policy, because this RSE guidance will kind of become your friends. Because when you, again, may have tricky conversations with parents about something that they may want to withdraw their child from, knowing the RSE guidance, which I think is personally quite clear, you can use this information to say, well, I'm really sorry that you feel like that, but actually, because it's written in this guidance, it's statutory, it is the law that your child is part of this lesson. So that knowing what the guidance is really, really key. And if you do have the opportunity to talk to parents, in my experience, I've given them a copy of this and also of the policy as well, because you may have it on your website and you may have hoped that the parents might have read it, they might not have done, maybe English isn't their first language and so on. By giving them all of this information, you're prepared for the conversation and you know exactly what it is that the child can and can't be withdrawn from. So my two top tips are kind of know your stuff. My sort of third tip, as Bex has already said, it's really important that you are open and you have clear communication with your parents and carers, so that when children return home from school, it isn't a surprise about the kind of conversations that you have been having with your students in school. So, for example, writing letters, maybe the half term before them, preparing them for the types of topics that students are going to be learning, be specific on there. Again, maybe not over kind of loading parents with the content, because sometimes things can kind of get lost if there's just too much information. So be specific, be clear, and be open about what it is that the children are going to be learning in this week, in this topic, at this time in our personal development lessons. So be specific around what it is. So for example, with our youngest children in reception year 1, one of the jigsaw units is about kind of naming body parts. So on the letter, be really specific, saying children will learn correct anatomical body part names, so that if parents have any kind of questions around that, it is really obvious about what it is that you're going to be covering. And fourthly, I would always try to take the opportunity to, first of all, to listen to the parents' concerns. Absolutely invite them in. And from my experience, I've always started that conversation by, can you tell me what it is that you're concerned about or what it is that you're not happy with? Because from my experience, the parents' misconception about what they thought their child will be learning is absolutely 100% not anywhere near like the kind of lesson content that the children will actually be having. So I think it's always really important, if we give parents the opportunity to talk, then that is our window, that's our opportunity to say, okay, well, thank you for explaining your concerns to me, but it isn't like this, it's like this. So from a couple of personal examples from my school, I had parents asking me if we're going to be showing them any photographs of body parts. I said, no, absolutely. All of the lesson content is drawings. Other kind of questions about what the actual content would be. And it was by far nothing like the actual content. So I think it's really, really important to listen to their concerns. For example, again, you may have some parents who are not comfortable with their child learning about same-sex relationships or within families. So the way I explained that was that we teach all of our students to be respectful for all and encourage everybody to treat everybody in exactly the same way. And that can't be kind of frowned upon, because actually all faiths would appreciate, you know, students learning about tolerance and respect. And again, we'll go back to your RSE guidance and say they can't be withdrawn from this because of this, this, and this. So those are my kind of 4, you know, top tips for primary. Know your curriculum content well from reception right up to year 6. Know the RSE guidance, because it's going to be really helpful for you when you have a tricky conversation about what can and can't be withdrawn from. Yeah, and again, being really clear about what the children are learning, and listen to parents' concerns, because from my experience, their understanding of what is going to be taught and actually what the lesson content actually contains are 2 really different things. And I have shared lesson content with those parents. I haven't enabled them to take them away, but I have shared them and said, look, this is the lesson that we will be learning. So, so for example, we could keep your child in, we have to keep your child in for any teaching about puberty. However, when it comes to conception, that is the lesson that the child could be removed from, because your guidance kind of explains that. And I've advised parents when they have asked to remove from the lesson, I've said, you know, could you have the conversation at home and just say to them, in our family, we believe this, and so this is why we don't want you to be part of that lesson, because we've also got to think about the student, about why they will be wanting to be with their peers, and why they're not. So I've always tried to kind of plant the seed with parents, you know, please could you kind of explain as to why you don't want them to be part of that. And also understanding where the parents are coming from, what their background is also really interesting. One of my last recent conversations was with a family who were from Egypt, and they were slightly kind of horrified at the lesson content, because they said that in Egypt, students wouldn't learn any kind of sex education until they got to university. So not even primary school or secondary, it was until university. So they were really kind of really concerned about what their children were going to be learning. So to me, that was a really big lesson actually to learn from where they were coming from. So we were able to say, okay, this is the content, your child needs to be in for this part of the lesson, but this lesson they can be withdrawn from. So I always found it's really helpful to listen to parents and listen to where they're coming from. So I hope those kind of primary top tips are helpful, but it's very much reiterating the kind of things that Bex has already talked about. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thanks, Helen. Can you just confirm that at primary, what is it, just the conception lesson that they can be withdrawn from?
Yeah. So pre-puberty they need to be part of. Yeah, that's in our guidance. They have to be in for that part. Any kind of conversations around same-sex, relationships and same-sex families, just as a model of a family. Yeah, that is statutory. That is part of the law. They can't be removed from that.
Okay, so for confirmation, it's just the lesson about conception within the sex education that they can be removed from. So it is only a single sort of area of teaching. Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to Sharon, who is going to talk to us from a secondary point of view. Thank you, Sharon.
Okay, so my slide actually contains the information that Bex has already shared, I think, more or less, but I will elaborate on some of the points that have been brought up. So essentially, as you can read, the policy should be published and to allow us to be open and transparent with parents. We do make sure, as Bex has already said, that we have those example resources made available. Okay. You also, as already been mentioned, parents continue to have the right to request to withdraw their child from the sex education part of PSHE, unless there are exceptional circumstances. And my previous school had a couple of occasions where, on religious grounds, the parents presented strong arguments around certain elements of the sex education module, and in those situations those cases were dealt with on a case-by-case basis by the head teacher, who made the decision and directed myself as a PSHE lead, that I would advise you in those kind of instances as PSHE leads in your schools to be clear on what the head would consider exceptional circumstances, and provided you're having those conversations, which obviously can be difficult at times, and you're open and transparent as an institution anyway, any problems will be avoided and the students will be in the majority of the lessons and only withdrawn from those elements of the sex education as in the guidance. Okay, as Bex has already said, there's no right to withdraw from the relationships education or from the health education. It is sometimes helpful to be clear on whatever you are publishing to the parents regarding your overviews on your resources, that the LGBT content is included in the relationships education and that it is age appropriate for wherever you are delivering it, whether that be in year 9 into year 10 or 11 or wherever else you deem it to be appropriate as part of your wider curriculum model. Sometimes in my experience, parents have considered it to be a separate issue, and it is worth making it clear that it is part of the relationships education. So parents do not have the right to withdraw their children from that element. And that can, of course, lead to some tricky conversations. And it's really important that you provide your parents information of how they go about withdrawing and making sure that's clear in your policy, because otherwise there can lead to some quite tricky conversations around somebody being withdrawn, somebody else not being withdrawn. So again, in the interest of clarity and sort of transparency, make sure you do include how parents could withdraw and which bits specifically they are entitled to withdraw from. So that's the wider picture regarding the DfE guidance. To pick up some of the other points, I think it's unique. We're all aware that having these conversations with parents can be difficult, and I've always found in my experience that just being open and transparent. Don't avoid the parents' questions. If a parent comes to you with a question, it will be based on something that they are genuinely concerned about, and that is valid, and it is likely to be something that you can address as a professional, and you're able to have those the answer to, and therefore be able to respond in an appropriate way to them to reassure them. I think the biggest thing I've learned over the time that I've worked in PSHE as a PSHE lead and various different things is to reassure parents that all the topics that you address are delivered at an age appropriate point and within the wider curriculum. A lot of times the worry and the kind of questioning is coming from the concern that it won't be age appropriate or it will be too much information, and that kind of follows back from the primary point, really, that actually the thought of what's being taught is probably quite different from what the reality of what's being taught, until you get to some of the really tricky subjects around coercive behaviour into Key Stage 4. I would say again that it's probably wise not to share too much content out in the wider realm. Obviously, if a parent asks you and comes to you for questions, then you make that judgment call as to what you share. But actually putting everything out on the website is not what we're suggesting that you do. And then to reiterate the other points that were made, know your policy inside out, know your curriculum model. If you know exactly when things are taught, where they're taught, why they're taught, and to which year groups, you can allay any fears almost immediately, really, because as I said, it comes back to parents being concerned about the timing of the information more often than not. What you're specifically going to teach sometimes is secondary to the kind of, actually my child's not old enough to do this, I want to make that decision for them. And having those conversations and being open about that is half of the battle. It's really, really important, I think, as well, to, as with any lesson in a school, to reassure parents that PSHE lessons are a safe space for open discussion, particularly in key stage 3 and 4, where actually we want our students to ask really good questions and to have those questions answered appropriately, and again giving parents that reassurance that their child will have the ability to share their opinion and their view, but it will be framed within our wider expectations around tolerance and respect of all, in the same way that you would do really for any other curriculum area. You're going to want and encourage your students to be respectful of each other and tolerant of each other, aren't you? So don't be scared to have that kind of conversation, really. So the biggest example I have from recent experiences around the idea of LGBTQ plus, and a parent contacted me in my previous school around the specific content because they wanted reassurance that the beliefs that they held wouldn't be dismissed alongside any other people's beliefs. And I was able to have the conversation around safe space, but respect and tolerance. And from that, we had lots of interesting conversations. We talked a little bit about the content, but essentially it came down to the fact that everybody, whatever the topic that's being taught, has the right to their opinion. Everybody should be respected to have that opinion, but you need to be aware and open to the fact that other people may have a different opinion. Essentially that's what it comes down to, really. Okay, open transparency, knowing your stuff, giving reassurance when it's required, and I think that is it.
Thank you, Sharon. I think when we talk about engaging with parents in PSHRE, there's like an automatic fear that comes across, like I don't want to have that conversation, and this automatic assumption that it's going to be a difficult conversation. And I think it's really important that we approach any conversation armed with information, but approach it with a positive light, with a positive spin, rather than assuming it's going to be difficult and so immediately going on the defensive. I've got a couple of other things to add. That prior to this, I had a quick chat with our safeguarding officer at school, and asked her about any conversations that she has had with parents regarding engaging with PSHE, or with parents wishing to withdraw their child. And she was really clear on 2 additional things that we haven't already included in this. And the first one was safeguarding. The fact that if a parent wishes to withdraw a child from parts of sex education, that she would check with the designated safeguarding leader that there are no safeguarding issues surrounding that particular child with regards to anything to do, well, any safeguarding issue particularly around that child that might flag up something. Why would we want to withdraw that child for them learning about their body, how it works, what sex is, etc.? Is there a safeguarding red flag there? And so it's really important that your DSL is included should a parent wish to withdraw their child from the sex education part of it. And the second thing was to make sure that you have got a paper trail, that if a child is withdrawn, that a record of the conversation that parent has had with the head teacher, because ultimately it is the head teacher's decision. It's the guidance states that the head teacher makes this decision. So in some ways that makes life easier for us as PSHE leads, that we defer that decision to the head teacher. that there is a paper trail, that conversation that meeting has been logged, that whether that meeting has been minuted or recorded, or there's a follow-up letter that says this is what we have agreed and this is what your child has been withdrawn from, so that we've got that information, and that we can prove that that parent then knows, actually 3 terms before your child's 16th birthday, they are permitted to come back into sex education lessons. But also, should you end up, depending on how PSHE is run in your school, should you end up with a supply teacher or a cover teacher coming in to teach something, I think in most schools probably PSHE probably wouldn't be covered. You'd probably move that lesson. But just to ensure that we don't then accidentally include a child within a lesson that they shouldn't have been included with, because we've got that paper trail that says actually for definite that child shouldn't be in that lesson. So that's really important. So check with your designated safeguarding lead should a child want to be withdrawn, and if that child is to be withdrawn, that there is a paper trail that shows what they're withdrawn from and when they can re-enter the class. That would be my final 2 sort of pieces of information for you about that. So I don't think we have any more questions in the Q&A section. I think we've covered the 3 questions that we had leading up to this presentation. So if there aren't any further questions, I will just go on to what's happening with our next webinar in January. So can I please first thank Helen and Sharon for giving up their time this Tuesday evening to speak with us, and I hope that they get home with all the Somerset. I don't know if you there's obviously flooding all over the country, but Somerset is underwater. Unfortunately, quite large parts of Somerset are underwater. So thank you for your time this evening, for your expertise. Looking forward to our next PSHR network meeting. Will be a staff room style meeting, but about how do we support and inspire our non-specialists. So what we mean by staff room style meeting is that we are going to limit the tickets to 40 so that we can make sure everybody gets a chance to have a conversation. And during that meeting, we will break out into groups of about 4, where everybody can then have that conversation. And what we would like to invite is anybody that has a particular skill or expertise, or has been a PSHE lead for a while, who has got some top tips for how do we inspire our non-specialists who are teaching. It may well be that you work in a school and you have a couple of specialists that teach this, and therefore for you guys this isn't relevant. And it may well be you work in a school where you are the PSHE lead and everybody else that teaches it is a non-specialist. So it's going to be limited to 40. So for those of you that wish to book on it, please, this is a plea, please only book on it if you're definitely going to come. So for example, this evening we've had 45 attendees, but we had 99 people book tickets. So what we want to make sure is that everybody that absolutely wants to come to this next meeting to have that staff room style conversation books a ticket and can actually get onto it and come to that meeting. But we would like to invite anybody that has a particular interest or a particular skill set, experience, etc. And so that what we would like to do is that in every breakout room, we have somebody who has a particular level of experience and can break out and support those 3 or 4 other members of that breakout room to have that conversation. That's on January the 23rd from 4 till 5. Our Twitter handle is @NetworkPSHRE. And as I said earlier, a video of this session will be available on our YouTube channel, which is free access to all. So if you enjoyed this session and you think it'd be valuable for anybody else, please circulate the link to that YouTube channel with them. And Chloe has just put the slides for today in the live Google Doc, which as a person who has attended this you will have access to it. And I think all that remains to be said is, dare I say it, we've only got a couple of weeks left. Have a superb Christmas and a wonderful holiday break from school. And we will hopefully see many of you back here on January the 23rd for our staff room style meeting. Thank you very much.